The 7 most powerful species. The story paints them with, immense capabilities, fleets that could wipe out planets, economies spanning hundreds of systems.
Like the Krell Imperium it mentions, right?
Exactly. The Krell are one of them. They are like the definition of conventional power in this galaxy. Big ships, big economy.
Okay, so that's the front row, established power. Now, the source deliberately creates this huge contrast. Where are the humans?
Way, way in the back, last row. Almost an afterthought.
Really tucked away.
Totally. And the description is pretty blunt. Galactic infants, basically. They've only had faster-than-light travel for about a century.
Early on the scene, and their territory.
Tiny. Just 17 systems. Militarily. A joke. Negligible.
And biologically.
Unremarkable is the word used. No natural armor, not super strong. Senses are pretty limited compared to others. They basically only got a seat because of some old inclusivity rule.
So it's visual, right? They're literally in the background.
Yeah.
Figuratively, too.
Yeah, it's a really strong image. The powerful up front, the seemingly insignificant hidden in the back.
Okay. And into this grand, established structure comes the big problem. The hegemony crisis. What's going on there?
Well, this species, the hegemony, they've been pushing into neutral territory. Relentlessly.
Causing problems.
Huge problems. Displacing millions, creating chaos. It's a major destabilizing conflict for the whole alliance.
And the big players, the directorate at the front, they've obviously tried to stop this.
Oh, yeah. They threw the book at them, all the conventional tools.
Like what?
Well, economic sanctions, military blockades, diplomatic censure from the assembly itself, the usual power plays.
Right, the standard toolkit. And the result, according to the source.
Zip, nada. Nothing worked.
Nothing.
Zero impact. The hegemony just kept expanding, ignored it all.
Huh. So after months of applying all that pressure, nothing changes. That must have led the directorate to some conclusion about the hegemony's nature.
It did. Their thinking kind of solidified around this idea. Okay, the hegemony are aggressive, sure, but the reason our pressure isn't working is that they must not feel fear or anxiety like we do.
Ah, okay. So they assumed immunity to standard pressure tactics.
Exactly. That became the accepted wisdom, at the front of the room. They just don't react like us.
Right, and there's maybe our first big insight from this story for you. If you're facing a problem, just throwing your biggest, most familiar tools at it.
Especially if they're based on assumptions about the other side.
Yeah, assumptions that might be wrong. It can just lead nowhere. Complete failure. The directorate had the power, but they were applying it based on a model that hegemony didn't fit.
And they couldn't see why it wasn't working. They were stuck.
Like trying to hammer a screw, as you said earlier.
Pretty much, yeah.
And this is the moment, right, when the perspective from the very back row suddenly matters. Ambassador Sarah Chen from Earth stands up.
And the reaction? Immediate dismissal. You've got Supreme Commander Vexile, the Krell leader, actually sneering.
Openly.
Oh yeah, contempt from the other directorate members too. You have to remember, they've been failing at this for 6 months. 6 months, and now this nobody species from the back wants to chime in.
Their status, based on ships and systems, meant their ideas were just worthless before they even spoke.
Completely discounted, which is another interesting point, isn't it? How quick established powers can be to dismiss new ideas, especially from perceived outsiders.
Particularly when those powers are invested in the very methods that have failed. They couldn't imagine someone from the back row having anything useful to say.
They were locked into their front row perspective. But Chen, she wasn't talking about fleets or sanctions.
No. She just calmly says, basically, you're all looking at this the wrong way.
And her insight wasn't about power dynamics, not in the conventional sense. It was about observation.
Observation? How so?
Well, that's the crucial difference. The human team didn't just react to the crisis. They apparently spent 3 months just analyzing hegemony communications, patterns, nuances.
3 months, while the big guys were failing with blockades?
Exactly, and they found something critical. While the hegemony might not feel fear, they do experience curiosity. And the real kicker, profound boredom.
Boredom. Seriously. Yeah. So the reason they're invading neutral space and displacing millions isn't for resources or strategy. It's because they're just bored. Their society stagnated.
That's precisely the human insight. They figured out the hegemony wasn't driven by conquest, but by a deep-seated need for novelty, new stimulation. The invasions were a symptom of, cultural ennui.
Wow. Okay, that is a huge takeaway right there. The most effective solutions might come from understanding the real underlying driver, right? The non-obvious motivation.
Motivations that focusing only on power or resources would totally miss.
The humans asked why in a completely different way, not how do we force them. but what are they actually seeking?
Yeah, maybe something they weren't even consciously aware of themselves, shifting the whole frame of the problem.
Okay, so based on this, frankly, bizarre insight about boredom, what did the humans propose?
Something they called the Library Project.
The Library Project.
Yeah, the core idea was offer the hegemony access to humanity's cultural and scientific databases, all of it.
Offer them data to stop a war.
But with a twist. They structured it like a game. If the hegemony withdrew from territory, they'd unlock access to bigger, more complex packages of human data, information as a reward.
Okay, I can just picture the reaction in that grand assembly hall. You offer stories and science as a bribe to stop a rampaging empire.
Oh, the place erupted. The source says waves of laughter, derisive laughter.
Especially Vexile.
Vexile apparently struggled to even articulate his contempt. The idea of bribing them with, quote, stories, it was just unthinkable, ludicrous.
Which loops back to that earlier point, doesn't it? Dismissing novel ideas that challenge the framework.
Absolutely. The value proposition information, culture, novelty was so far outside their power-based thinking, it was instantly ridiculed, even though their own methods had completely failed.
But here's where the human approach gets even smarter, right? No. They didn't just pitch the idea theoretically.
Nope. They'd already run a pilot program, tested it discreetly. Through back channels, they gave a small, limited sample of data, maybe some basic math, a bit of music, who knows, to a hegemony commander on the border.
Just a little taste. And the result?
Voluntary withdrawal from a key outpost Epsilon 9 within 26 hours.
26 hours. After the directorate spent 6 months achieving nothing.
That's what Chen reported. You can imagine the silence then. Total disbelief. Someone apparently whispered, impossible.
What did Chen say?
Just told them to check their own military intelligence logs, calmly.
And Vexile, the Krell commander who was sneering earlier, he checks.
He checks and confirms it. The withdrawal from Epsilon 9 was logged. Real.
That must have sent a shockwave through the room.
Had to. I mean, one outpost isn't the whole war, but it was voluntary, it was fast, and it was triggered by data. It proved the human insight wasn't just theory, it worked.
And the humans? They were ready for this.
Completely. This wasn't some random idea they just thought of. They had apparently prepared 50 different data packages, already curated, progressively larger, more complex, ready to roll out the whole plan.
Incredible preparation.
Yeah.
So, okay, the big question then is how? How could this, insignificant species from the back row with no real military or economic clout?
Yeah, unremarkable biology.
How could they offer something so valuable that the galactic superpowers couldn't even conceive of, let alone provide?
And the source gives a really interesting answer here. It says that despite humanity's short time, relatively speaking, on the galactic stage, they had generated this astonishing diversity of cultural and intellectual stuff. Mathematics, music, philosophy, games, art, stories, entertainment, just sheer creativity.
Creativity that the older species had maybe lost.
Or maybe never developed in quite the same way. The source suggests they'd long forgotten that kind of explosive innovation.
Ah, okay, so human value wasn't ships or planets. It was their capacity for novelty, their intellectual output. They could literally create the thing the board hegemony craved.
Precisely. Their unique selling proposition, if you will, was creativity, not force. And Chen connects this directly back to why they sit in the back.
Right, that line. This is why humans sit in the back. We watch, we listen, we understand patterns that others miss.
It reinforces that whole idea. Being on the periphery, observing instead of commanding, let them see things the front row power players were totally blind to.
Like the hegemony's boredom. They wanted novelty. And humans, because of their history, were effectively novelty factories.
Perfectly put. And the outcome, it speaks for itself.
What happened next?
Within just 3 weeks of starting the Library Project exchange.
3 weeks.
The hegemony pulled back from 80% of the territory they'd occupied. 80%. And their leadership formally requested permanent access to the human databases, offered major concessions. The crisis that stumped the mighty alliance for months, pretty much over.
Just like that.
Yeah.
It completely sidestepped the whole power struggle. Didn't need fleets, didn't need sanctions.
Bypassed the stalemate entirely. And the story wraps up with this great image. The directorate in an emergency session finally grappling with what just happened.
In Vexile, the Krell commander.
He keeps finding himself looking back, back towards the human delegation.
Realizing something.
Yeah, having this profound shift. He gets it. Human power wasn't in weapons or territory. It was in their ideas, their creativity.
And his view on their seating changes too, right?
Completely. He suggests reconsidering the seating, but not to bring humans forward into the powerful rows. Instead, he starts to understand why they might actually prefer the back.
Why?
Because from there, they could see everything, the whole picture, including the subtle stuff, the motivations, the patterns.
That the people focused on projecting power from the front completely missed.
Exactly. It's a fantastic illustration.
So, okay, let's distill this.
Mm-hmm.
The core takeaway from this deep dive, using this sci-fi lens, seems to be this. Real success, breakthrough solutions, they often don't come from just applying more force or the usual tactics.
Right. They come from stepping back, getting a different perspective. Quiet observation.
And crucially, understanding the real, often hidden motivations driving the other side. It wasn't about beating the hegemony into submission.
No, it was about figuring out what they genuinely lacked in this case, novelty, intellectual stimulation, and then providing it.
It completely reframes what counts as a valuable asset, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Sometimes understanding and creativity are way more powerful than big spaceships.
Definitely flips the script on strategic leverage.
Okay, so for you listening to this, here's maybe a final thought to chew on, building on this story. Think about a challenge or a problem you're dealing with right now.
Could be anything. Work, negotiation, maybe even just a tricky relationship.
Instead of just defaulting to your standard approach, the front row tactics you always use, what if you tried deliberately stepping back?
What could you learn by consciously observing from a different angle? From the back row, so to speak.
What less obvious needs or motivations might be driving the situation or the other people involved? What patterns might you be missing because you're so focused on the conventional view right in front of you?
Something to think about.